Helmut. Thank you for your availability to participate in this event. Thank you, Nicholas, for accepting the moderation.
Yeah, my pleasure.
La salle est ouverte. Nous allons attendre quelques minutes le temps que les gens se connectent.
Parfait, parfait. Merci, Odia. Bienvenue à tous ceux qui se joignent. Je vois que le nombre augmente rapidement. Merci de vous joindre à cette session. Thanks for joining this webinar. Please join. We will allow a few minutes for participants to join. I see the number coming up quite quickly. For those of joining, thanks for joining this webinar. We will start in a couple of minutes, allowing people to join in. So please continue. Please stay with us when we allow people to come in. This session is bilingual. There will be French and English with translation, and then you will have access to the translation interpretation tab at the bottom of your screen. So we'll give it another minute before we start. Welcome everyone to the webinar. Let's get started. Thanks for joining us. So welcome to this webinar. Main language, I will use English, although I'm French, but I will use English as the main language. But as I said, there is interpretation both in French and English. And then for one of the panelists, I will be introducing the panelists in French. So welcome to this webinar. On behalf of the World Food Programme, the government of the Côte d'Ivoire, and the Regional Center of Excellence Against Hunger and Malnutrition in Abidjan, this is to welcome you to this webinar on social protection programming in Africa, opportunities and challenges to improving food and nutrition security for the most vulnerable. My name is Nicolas Bidot. I will be your moderator today. I am the Chief of Social Protection at the World Food Programme based in Rome. So ahead of us, we have 90 minutes of a rich conversation. We have a great panel of discussants with us, and there should be plenty of time for Q&A. Overall objective of this session is very much to have a good discussion on the role of social protection in improving food and nutrition security. We will both look at the global context, but also zooming in on the Africa context. And with the panel that we have with us, where we should be able to address, and we will be addressing both the issue of the supply side that social protection offers, both looking at key instruments like school feeding, or the role of social protection in fighting food inflation. We will also be looking at the demand side, looking at the importance of social protection also and its role on securing decent jobs to offer opportunities to, from the demand side for vulnerable households. And then we will hear also the importance of having an integrated approach, social protection and nutrition for better outcomes. So the importance of integration. So should be well covered, again, a global perspective, zooming in on Africa, around social protection and its role in food security and nutrition. Now, let me turn to Christiane Boigny, She is the head of operation at the Regional Center of Excellence, for some opening remarks. Over to you, Christiane.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. Welcome, participants, our dear speakers and participants, colleagues, and especially panelists, and Nicholas for accepting also the moderation. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning or good afternoon, depending on the region from which you are connecting. We are very pleased to see so many of you attending this webinar. So my name is Christiane Buoni. As Nicola presents, I'm the head of operation at the Regional Center of Excellence Against Hunger and Malnutrition, CERFAM, and it's a real pleasure for me to deliver these opening remarks on behalf of the director of CERFAM, which is organizing this webinar in close collaboration with WFP and the Republic of Cote d'Ivoire. Let me begin by highlighting the importance, just a quick reminder of the thematic we are about to discuss and how we are motivated to hear from this webinar today. The past couple of years have been defined by unprecedented crises, which combined impacts have increased the poverty rates across the globe. From the COVID-19 pandemic to climate change and the most recent war in Ukraine, these crises have negatively impacted the vulnerability of population across the world, and especially in Africa. 2022 was the year of unprecedented hunger, with levels higher than even before. 828 million people in the world went to bed hungry every night, corresponding to around 10.5% of the world's population. In Africa, these numbers are still more alarming. 1 in 5 Africans, or 278 million people, are facing chronic hunger. This is around 20% of the people of the African continent. In the last year, moderate and severe food insecurity increased in the most Africa, the region with the highest prevalence at both levels of severity. According to the 2022 Global Report on Food Crisis Mid-Year Update, nearly 41 million from 14 countries in West Africa and the Sahel faced acute food insecurity. Many countries with support from technical and financial partners have responded to this crisis, increasing the focus on social protection systems to alleviate the effect of the crisis and their respective population. From social cash transfer to school feed interventions, especially the African countries are increasingly investing in social protection to strengthen the resilience of their population and lift the most vulnerable out of poverty. Ladies and gentlemen, today's webinar is the first of a series of 3 webinars looking at social protection systems, agriculture, food security and nutrition, yielding opportunities to reduce the gap towards zero hunger and malnutrition through linkages and integrated approach. Today's session sets the tone for the remainder of a series, which will bring the light to which governments and institutions can advance their food and nutrition agenda by integrating food security and nutrition components in social protection agenda. We at CERFAM hope to have the pleasure of having you attend the next 2 webinars around this thematic. But very quickly, I hope you take advantage of this meeting to learn more about the policy, initiatives, perspectives, and strategies on social protection programs and their potential to improve food and nutrition security. We have an excellent round of panelists with different experiences from institutions and countries. And I hope we will be able to really learn from them today, for sure, and also hear from their experiences and see how they can apply for the different contexts. So I wish you a very great session, and thank you very much. Thank you, Nicholas, over to you.
Thank you, Christiane, for setting the stage. Like you said, it's an important webinar on social protection, the first of a series organized by the Center of Excellence. So very well done to you. Let's get into it. So let me introduce the panel to you. And then first of all, be reminded that this webinar is recorded. So for those who are not available to attend, they will be able to view it. We have about 90 minutes of webinar, 4 panelists, about 10 minutes each per panelist. And then this is a space for you. So if you have a question and if you have questions, please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. We will do two things around Q&As. If there are questions coming during the presentation, then we will take 1 or 2 questions max to answer sort of some of the burning questions at the end of each presentation. And then you will have an opportunity to come back at the end of the webinar. We will allow 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes time for Q&A at the end. So plenty of time for you, but please come in with your questions on the Q&A tab, and we will manage to provide the answers and work with the panelists in doing that. So let me first turn to and introduce you our panelists. Like Christiane was saying, we're very privileged to have high quality panelists on this session with us today. First of all, let me introduce and maybe the panelists to put on your screen so people can see you. So first, let me introduce our first panelist. She will be, she's Yuko Okamura. She's the senior economist at the World Bank, and she's covering social protection and the labor sectors. She has worked on various regions, including Africa, to support governments in reforming and expanding social protection programs, particularly social assistance, including nutrition-sensitive cash transfers. She is currently part of the global team, which leads the effort to track social protection responses to crises, including the COVID-19 and inflation, food inflation. Thanks, Yuko. The second panelist is Paul Carles van Ufford. Paul is the regional advisor social policy with the UNICEF West and Central Africa office. In this capacity, Paul provides oversight and guidance to UNICEF social policy teams in the region in the fields of social protection, child poverty, public finance management, and local governance. Prior to joining this position, Paul worked as the chief social policy with UNICEF in Tanzania, Zambia, Vietnam, and Senegal. And Paul holds a PhD in human geography from the University of Amsterdam. Thank you, Paul, for joining us. Our fourth panelist is Helmut Schwarzer. Hi, Helmut, thanks for joining us. Helmut is head of Public Finance, Actual and Statistical Services Unit of the ILO Social Protection Department in Geneva. He's been on this job since December 2021. He is trained in economics and economic development in Brazil and Germany. He has worked as a researcher in Brazil and as the Undersecretary for Social Security for the Bolsa Familia program in Brazil. So Undersecretary for Social Security between 2003 and 2010, and working on the important program, the Bolsa Familia program in Brazil, 2015 and 2016. He has worked also as a senior specialist for social security at the ILO Social Protection Department in Geneva between 2010 and 2015, and at the ILO country office in Mexico between 2016 and 2021. Thank you, Helmut, for joining us. En français maintenant, notre quatrième panéliste est Dr Sidibé Anago du Burkina Faso. So, Dr Sidibé occupe les fonctions de secrétaire permanente de l'initiative présidentielle Assurer à chaque enfant en âge scolaire au moins un repas équilibré par jour. Et elle occupe cette fonction depuis 2021. Dr Sidibé est titulaire d'un PhD obtenu à l'université agronomie de Uppsala en Suède en 2009. Elle est aussi enseignante-chercheur en management de l'alimentation et de la nutrition à l'INERA au Burkina Faso, après avoir reçu un master de sciences à l'Institut de médecine tropicale d'Anvers en Belgique. Auparavant, elle a été respectivement représentante permanente adjointe du Burkina Faso auprès des agences spécialisées du système des Nations Unies, la FAO, le PAM et le FIDA à Rome entre 2015 et 2021. Elle a été chargée de mission, chef de département de l'économie rurale et de l'environnement de la primature du Burkina Faso entre 2012 et 2015, conseillère ministre en charge de l'élevage du Burkina Faso. Elle possède plus de 15 publications et est reviewer dans des revues scientifiques internationales. Merci, Dr Sidibé, de rejoindre ce panel. Comme vous le voyez, nous avons un riche panel. Commençons par le commencement. Nous nous tournons alors vers Yuko Okamura pour sa présentation qui va se concentrer sur l'importance de la protection sociale en tant qu'instrument pour mitiger l'impact de l'inflation. Yuko, over to you.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you are. And I'm Yuko. Thanks for the kind of presentation. So let me directly go to my presentation. Let me know if you can share my screen. See my screen?
Yes, Yuko, we can see. Maybe if you can put on projection
the
mode.
slideshow. Yes.
Yeah, slideshow.
So thank you very much again for inviting the World Bank to this important dialogue. And I'll be presenting our work on behalf of the World Bank team. And in fact, social protection jobs global practice alone, we are about 300 of them, really closely working with the government counterparts, especially the Ministry of Social Affairs and Social Development in many cases, to support the government effort to improve and reform, expand their social protection and labor policies. So let me dive in. So as a bank, we have a lending portfolio to support the government needs. This has actually expanded over the past years. Actually, in terms of the amount, doubled. First, it started with the COVID, and our portfolio, especially the new emergency response, reached about over the $17 billion from April 2020 to December 2020. And then another crisis. Price shocks and the food security started last year. And in terms of the commitment alone to support these price shocks, about the 3.4 billions were counted for the 25 new projects which were approved during that period. And we expect there are about 46 million people benefited from these operations through the government support. And you can also see the country which are supported through particular example of the operation, which are really spread across the world. So this is the lending part, really showing the expansion of our portfolio. Let me move to some analytical part, because as the World Bank, we also try to provide knowledge, necessary knowledge, evidence, example from the other countries to support the policy dialogue. And this tracking of the global responses related to the social protection and the labor has been one of the main activities over the past years. And this actually started from the COVID, because country already started announcing the new measures on the onset of the pandemic. And we really wanted to have a good understanding. So that was an initiation of the global tracker. And as you can see, blue line, it shows the number of the COVID tracker, which reached eventually by the end, nearly 4,000 social protection labor measures. And then Ukraine war broke out, and also the price shocks started about a year ago. And then we also started tracking social protection responses, but now really those responding to the price shocks. And then so far, this is a living document exercise, because measures evolve over time. So far, we have published 4 versions for the price shock tracker, and the last version was actually recently published, actually December, and the tally reached about over 1,000 measures across the world. So, key message: what we are observing? We are actually seeing the kind of different patterns of these measures. Let me give you the example. For example, social assistance consisted as a main modality during the COVID, counting about 41% of the total measure was really the social assistance, informal cash transfer, so on. But in case of social prices price shocks, the share of the social assistance is less than 1/3. And we are also part of the team really focusing on the social assistance part, which is non-contributory, typically targeted to the poor and vulnerable. We also see the different feature in terms of the number of the cash transfer measure and also the share of the one-off payments. Another example is the frequency and how they actually government implement these cash transfer measure. If you can actually see the right side, share of new cash transfer measures during the COVID, most of these cash transfers are implemented as a new program, but the inflation, the share is 61%, meaning many of 40% of the programs actually really leverage the existing program. So that's also another feature and the difference we are observing, reflecting the different natures of the shocks. So let us also look into a little bit about the composition of these measures beyond the total number. So what we are also observing these price shocks, inflation, ongoing inflation, is subsidy being very popular. As you can see the red part. Subsidy consisted more than 1/3 of the total measure. And then tax measure followed by the social assistance, 29. And the third popular measure was actually the tax measure. And as you can also see, there is a variation across the country. Let's go to the Africa, far left. And you even see more increase in terms of the share of the subsidy. Among the 45 African countries in our sample, 42% of the measures are already concentrated the subsidy, which covers those related to the fee, utility deduction waiver, other related to the direct food subsidy, the fuel, and the fertilizer and subsidy to the farmers. And this is a slide showing like some selected countries, showing the spending level of the selected countries. Again, mostly economy is heavily invested in subsidies, as you can see, and the share of the spending level as share of the GDP reached almost 7% in case of the Poland. Let's also look at the African countries. Cameroon, Nigeria, Togo, and Somalia are also checked in the figure. That's that same trend applies because Cameroon and Nigeria, we see quite a bit of the red part showing the increased use of subsidy. But what are the takeaway from here? Because as a trend before the crisis, like our effort, the effort has been to how to reform universal price subsidy, which tend to be costly, very fiscally very costly and regressive. And they moved that subsidy to the more targeted intervention supporting those affected. So this poses really important questions to reflect how we move forward. I would like to stop here, but those who are interested in learning more, there are a list of the resources, including the tracker that we shared. We also have quite a bit of relevant work related to the food security and nutrition. We are happy to share those materials for those who are interested. And lastly, there is also, I would like to take the opportunity to share an event which is happening tomorrow, again, organized by the World Bank and the World Food Program. This could be also very relevant and interesting to some of the participants, but because this really specifically looked into the social assistance, including the cash transfer, impact of the cash transfer, and the public works. And there has been a close partnership between the World Bank and WFP to generate the evidence to make the design and the implementation of these social assistance program more effective. So this is my end of my presentation, and thank you thank you for very much for listening, and I'm happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you so much, Yuko, for your great presentation. I think it was fantastic to hear the global perspective, but also how it's reflected into the Africa context. I don't see any question in the Q&A. You mentioned the importance of subsidies. Also, tax measures come in a great number also as a tool, right, to respond to some of those, so the COVID and the inflation. Do you have any examples of how what kind of taxes have been used? Is there anything you can elaborate a little bit more on?
Sure. These tax measures are actually related to the tax reduction, or sometimes there is an exemption for the certain tax, and plus another issue is related to the administration side beyond the amount of the tax waiver. So, for example, instead of you have to file tax on this day, typically tax declaration date is pretty strict in any countries. But because of considering there are quite a bit of people who are experience difficulty due to the economic shocks, quite a bit of country actually prolong the deadline for the tax subsidy. And we are also actually seeing some targeted tax measures. For example, child deduction. If you have a children and a certain category of the occupation, you could actually avail certain calculations to deduct in the calculation of the tax measure. So in a sense, these are tax measures are indirectly benefiting the household disposal income. I hope I answered to your question. Very well. Thank you, Yuko. I think what's impressive is to see how fast the measures have been put in place. When you see back to your graph that you had looking at the rapid scale up of those measures, quite impressive how government have been able to really adjust their system, their social protection system to mitigate and the drastic increase that we've seen in terms of all those measures. Thank you, Yuko. I don't see any question. I'm sure more questions will come at the end of the session. Thank you so much. Let me now introduce our second panelist, Paul Carles van Ufford from UNICEF. Paul will talk to us about the importance of an integrated approach for social protection and nutrition for better outcomes. Paul, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nicola, and thank you very much, Yuko, also for your very interesting presentation. So on behalf of the UNICEF team globally and here in the region, thank you so much to CERFAM and the government of Côte d'Ivoire for the invitation, and pleasure to speak about how we can get to a more integrated approach between social protection and nutrition. And I'm presenting those experiences from the perspective of UNICEF. It's very clear, I think the numbers speak for themselves, and there is quite a severe child food poverty crisis globally. I won't go into the numbers here, but as an effect of chronic levels of poverty and a series of shocks and crises that the global economy, but also regions in Africa have faced. The situation has reached a crisis level, and the socioeconomic impact of COVID, price inflation that Yuko already mentioned, and stakeholders, governments are moving to respond. And there is a strong consensus that it is important to mobilize different systems in that response: food and agricultural system, health systems, and also the social protection system. And I think the last point on this slide had that using the social protection system and using social protection programs to achieve improvements in nutrition outcomes has opportunities, and opportunities related to the global momentum for social protection that we have seen and that Yuko has very well explained in her previous presentation. So I would like to explain a little bit from our perspectives what we feel is important here, what it means to take a systems approach, and how to more optimally design social protection programs to include a nutrition dimension. Perhaps first a few words on taking a systems approach. And starting with a key element of all systems is actually the layer of evidence. Evidence to really understand very well how poverty and vulnerability and hunger and nutrition are interconnecting, how they intersect to produce outcomes for children and for families. That type of evidence, but also evidence on what works in terms of interventions, which social protection interventions have produced which impact, and how can we build upon that to better inform our policies and programs. And that is, of course, a second layer of a systems approach related to national policies and strategies and coordination mechanisms. For instance, it is, in our view, very critical that national social protection policies and strategies have clear objectives around nutrition, and vice versa, that nutrition strategies and policies explain how they will build on the national social protection system. And of course, this implies that we also need broad coordination mechanisms where relevant stakeholders come together from the various sectors. So that is one block again of a systems approach. And then we get to financing. There's no policy or strategy or national plan that can be implemented without sustainable, predictable, and adequate financing, whether that be for nutrition services or for social protection programs. Again, critical layer of a systems approach that we cannot overlook. And then we come to the component of the system that I will look into in a little bit more detail. That's about the design of programs and the delivery of programs, including in relation to information systems, monitoring and evaluation, and learning, and how these can connect the social protection system to food and agriculture systems, health systems, etc. Let's first look a little bit at what do we know? What do we know about how social protection interventions can help achieve improvements in nutrition outcomes? First one, to the left of the slide, is that we know that social protection programs provide a platform to reach the most vulnerable, most marginalized groups in the population who are typically, we know, most at risk and most in need, because they face deep and large financial constraints and affordability problems in terms of accessing adequate food or accessing nutritious diets. So social protection programs provide a platform, and we know that social protection programs, in particular cash transfers, have demonstrated to have an impact, for instance, on what people can spend on food. They have an impact, again, based on the evidence that we have on the diversity of the diets that people can afford, on the number of meals they consume in a day, and even on breastfeeding practices. So reducing barriers to nutritious and adequate food and diets. We also know that social protection programs, again, including cash transfers, prevent families and individuals from using negative coping strategies to deal with chronic poverty or with a crisis. And these negative coping strategies, they can include reducing the frequency of food intake or selling assets. And we know that social protection programs typically prevent that, and even more, they create productive inclusion opportunities. And they can help families increase their productivity, invest in their own land, produce food themselves instead of working as a casual laborer on somebody else's farm. And finally, we know that social protection programs help family overcome time and financial constraints to access essential social services, which, as we know, are also critical for nutrition outcomes. Social protection programs are necessary to make an impact on pathways to improve nutrition outcomes, but they are not sufficient. We know that social protection programs on their own cannot make that important difference in relation to reducing stunting or reducing wasting, for instance. So what implications does that have for program design? So I already focused, of course, a little bit on the evidence. So let me here delve a little bit into the applications. What do we know about optimizing social nutrition dimensions in social protection programs, and what entry points do we have? So first of all, of course, we can use targeting criteria. We can move targeting criteria towards targeting those groups in the population where we know vulnerability to malnutrition is highest. And for children, this typically is the window of the first 1,000 days in their lives. Another entry point to optimize social protection programs is when looking at the transfer value, and when it comes to cash transfers. To, again, what I talked about, helping families reduce that affordability gap. And for instance, in relation to what Yuko presented, making sure that the transfer value is not eroded as a result of inflation and rising food prices. We also know that the duration of social protection programs is strongly correlated with the impact we see. The longer the program, the deeper the impact. And then the final entry point is using layered or additional approaches than the narrow social protection intervention as such, and to overcome the yes, necessary but insufficient dilemma. So typically in Africa, UNICEF also has been supporting governments to develop what we call cash plus approaches, using social protection programs, cash transfer programs as an entry point to also deliver other services, including social and behavioral change interventions around infant and young child feeding, for instance, making referrals or delivering additional services in the field of nutrition, women's empowerment, or food production, and strengthening also the supply side in terms of social protection programs, helping people allow access to quality and sustainable services in health, or water and sanitation. So these are a few design elements. Then there are a couple of other reflections that we feel are important when it comes to integrating a nutrition dimension in social protection programs. Delivery capacity, a capacity of various stakeholders at central and local level around implementing nutrition sensitive and coordinating nutrition sensitive social protection programs. And for instance, information systems. There's lots of discussion in many countries around the role of registries in helping quickly accessing vulnerable groups, and how can we make these registries in such a way that they include also nutritional vulnerabilities, just as an example. It's also about thinking how to scale up nutrition sensitive social protection programs in context of shocks and crisis, what we call shock responsive social protection. In the first place, ensuring continuity of existing programs, but then thinking about ways to enroll more people, and what we call horizontal expansion, or deepen the transfer value or the range of services, what we call vertical expansion. Again, even in fragile context, even in response to crisis, we always continue to stress the importance of prevention through expanding the regular routine social protection programs. And then finally, for reasons of sustainability, really important to have the gender dimension coming out very clearly in design and delivery of program, because tackling these root causes is really in the long run one way to achieve sustainable improvements in nutrition. Almost at the end, we have a couple of examples. I won't go into detail, but you will receive the presentation in countries where UNICEF supports government to expand and make their social protection programs more nutrition sensitive, and maybe we can get back to these in the discussion. And so I would like to end with what I had from my UNICEF perspective believe are some of the key messages I try to convey today. We need social protection programs in Africa to operate at scale, and they can only do so if there is adequate predictable and sustainable financing in place. Only in that way can we optimize the prevention function, which is key when it comes to social protection programs. We have seen, I hope, that there are several ways through targeting plus approaches or the transfer value where we can optimize the design of social protection programs and to help reductions in child food poverty. We have also seen that some of these plus approaches can be important to optimize the results. For instance, when it comes to connecting social and behavioral change interventions to social protection programs. But it's also clear we need capacity for that. Capacity in particular at the front line where it comes to implementing those programs. And when it comes to taking a systems approach, we can, hopefully we have some ideas to say we should also intervene at the policy level. We should look at coordination, financing, and programs. So that is maybe a systems approach. I have focused a little bit, I'm aware, on cash transfer programs, but of course there's a range of social protection programs, including school canteen, school feeding, public works, and others that we can optimize to help improve nutrition outcomes, again, across delivery and the design parameters. And only if we work across the different systems and within the social protection system is then where we can achieve change that we can call transformative to make a real difference in the situation of children. So that's what I wanted to share, colleagues, and happy to elaborate further when we have time to discuss. Nicolas.
Thank you, Paul. Very, very comprehensive presentation, well covered. I think you hit all the key critical aspects of the importance of that integrated approach and the systems approach. I really, appreciate your points on the importance of having a food and nutrition security objective in the program, which is not necessarily the case. And it's again back on the same dilemma: is it a poverty targeting versus a food security nutrition targeting, right? And what we are seeing now is there's a lot of food insecurity and malnutrition issues. So how do we make sure that we are targeting also not just on poverty, but also on issues of food security, food insecurity and malnutrition? Paul, there's one question that came up during your presentation. If you could elaborate more, you made a point on connecting social protection with productive inclusion. Can you elaborate more a little bit on that?
Yeah, sure. I think what we have seen from the evidence that we have on the impact of cash transfers is that it allows people, even with that small additional sum of money that is delivered regularly, it allows people to invest in their livelihoods, and it allows them to invest in production. And one example that I gave is that we have seen in several countries that poor people, they tend to work as casual laborers on someone else's plot because they lack the financial means to buy the seeds, the fertilizer, or the equipment to work on their own plot, even if they have land. So that is what we have seen in terms of time allocation, investments. People tend to increase productivity. Now, if we link that with agriculture extension systems or better advice or access to markets, that is then where we can optimize that productive inclusion. And sometimes we also refer to economic inclusion, and that we have seen in particular in relation to women, where women are the main recipients of cash transfers. They have been able to start micro businesses, and they have been able to accumulate some capital in that way to become more autonomous and empowered economically in the first place. So these are very important multiplier effects at work when it comes to social protection programs.
Fantastic, thanks. And it's a great segue, Paul, to the next presenter. Helmut Schwarzer from ILO will join now to discuss the importance of social protection on decent jobs. As we have seen, the COVID global food crisis has not just hit the supply side, but it's been hitting also the demand side with job losses on the rise. So role of importance of livelihood, of decent jobs, and the role of social protection. Over to you, Helmut.
Thank you very much, Nicolas, and good afternoon, good morning to all persons, all colleagues who are here. I will also share my screen, and I hope that you can see the presentation.
Yes, we can. Yep.
Fine. So I propose to quickly talk about what you just referred to, Nicolas, the linkage between the concept of decent work and social protection on the one side and food security on the other. You know that the ILO is not an agency with, let's say, the mission to promote the food security as the first mission, but of course by means of promoting decent work and the other coin, the social protection associated to the decent work concept, we also contribute to this goal of promoting food security in the world. The second point, which I hope will be complementary to what my fellows, my colleagues from other agencies have already spoken about, is an outlook on the labor markets, because labor income is key as well for food security. And we have had 3 documents which were recently published towards the end of last year and beginning of the current year: the ILO Monitor on the World of Work, the WESO, the World Employment and Social Outlook, and the Global Wage Report, and that can give us some pieces of information in that regard. And finally, maybe as a possible way forward, as well, the idea of the Global Accelerator for Jobs and Social Protection, which for fair transitions, which is an initiative of the Secretary General of the United Nations. Well, as spoken, food security is not only an issue of food supply. Of course, it is extremely important to have the availability of food. And when I participate in G20 meetings, for example, on the finance track, the ministries of finance, central banks, they also speak about food security, but only from the point of view of the supply of food. But then it is also, in my opinion, and not only my opinion, it's the opinion of the ILO, it is also an issue of people having access to food by means of the remuneration for their work and social protection benefits and other forms of income. I mention here a few, let's say, concepts and documents of the ILO that link the goal of employment and social protection with food and nutritional security. For example, the concept of decent work, which contains the right to full and productive employment and the access to social protection. Social protection floors is one of the concepts that the United Nations have been promoting, and we have a recommendation which urges countries to extend basic social security guarantees to all. We also call for decent work for agricultural workers and for workers in the supply chains which build up on the agricultural work, so that not only, let's say, the production of food and the supply of food is a contribution to food security, but also decent work for the workers in the sector that produces food is important for the ILO as well. And if we quote, again, it is not, let's say, our key business, the ILO speaking in detail about food security. This is a role that where we support the World Food Programme and the FAO. But if we mention experiences, good practices, which link decent work, social protection, food security. We will think about how social insurance, not only social assistance, but social insurance as well, schemes can play a role as parts of national food security systems. So I think that an excellent contribution that we have heard here is that social protection by itself is not, let's say, sufficient, but it is an important part of an important tool in a set of tools, in a toolkit that is needed to face the issue of food security. Then the outlook on labor markets. We have not yet recovered from COVID. The COVID had a major impact on labor markets and on the economies of the world. And the recovery was underway at the beginning of last year, and it slowed down in many countries. It even stalled. So we are facing a divergent development. So the countries, industrialized countries, have recovered labor markets to a great extent. Upper middle income countries to a good extent have also reached pre-COVID levels last year, had reached, but lower middle income and low income countries, they had stalled their recoveries and even started worsening again. So the slowdown of global employment growth is forecasted to 1% in the year 2023. Africa, which had relatively lower performance if compared to other regions of the world, this year is estimated to have a higher employment growth than the rest of the world, than the average of the world. And of course, multiple crises are overlapping. One of them, as our colleague from the World Bank has already mentioned, inflation is eroding the purchasing power of wages and of social protection benefits. Central banks have tightened monetary policy, and this has an impact on families, companies, and countries, and fiscal space becomes difficult. So we think that what we risk proposing, what we propose as ILO, is that countries should develop policies that aim at adjusting minimum wages to inflation. Don't let minimum wages and social protection benefits lose purchasing power. I took a quick look at a database that we have about the rules of different social protection schemes, 343 pension and other benefit schemes in the world, which we know about them. 186 have no clear indexation rule to inflation, so that's the majority, and the other less than half of the schemes adapt to prices, to wages, or to a mix of these references. Then it is important to foster bargaining, to empower the trade unions, to allow them to bargain for wage increases. As you have already mentioned, many colleagues have already mentioned, measures targeting certain groups, taxes, tax policies are important. And windfall taxes on the winners of the current situation, for example, the energy companies, are extremely important to finance the policy package. A few figures. We are currently at a level of 205 million people in the world which are unemployed. Before COVID, that figure was around 195. We have about half of the workers of the world, or more than half of the workers of the world, in the informal sector. So that means that they don't have access to social protection systems. 214 million people work and they do not earn sufficient. That they are in extreme poverty. This is another huge problem. The current constellation, the macroeconomic constellation in the world, will deliver us probably an increase to 208 million unemployed by the end of 2023. And a final figure from our World Social Protection Report that was published 1.5 years ago is that around 47% of the world population has no access to social protection. My final slide is a possible way out. We as UN agencies and countries and also private sector should build alliances around a proposal that our Secretary General of the United Nations did in his common agenda that he published in September 2021 at the General Assembly, which contains the so-called global accelerator. No? The idea here is to avoid that this great divergence in the recovery from the COVID crisis and now from the following crisis, that it deepens, so that we have a stronger coordination of the agencies and of the multilateral coordination in the world. It would require more policy coherence, policy packages that are mutually reinforcing instead of one working against the other. It will need more effort on a financing pillar and also more international solidarity. So the countries should comply with their the goals, the targets that they have set for themselves in terms of international solidarity. The overseas development assistance has not reached the 0.7% that had been established before, and it is important to build this multilateral cooperation, a coalition that helps forging the future social contract at global and at national level. I don't think that we have much more time to go into detail, perhaps during the discussion. So thank you very much, and it is an honor to take part of this event.
Thank you so much, Helmut, for your interventions. Very comprehensive, also on the importance of jobs and the role of social protection in that space, in stimulating the job, but also all the measures that need to be in place to go in that direction. The importance of offering decent jobs. You mentioned a particular sector of activity, which is, agricultural. Maybe a question back is, in particular in the low-income, low to middle-income countries, what are the other sector of activity that could benefit from, the support on the decent jobs besides maybe the agricultural sector? Is there any particular perspective on that?
Well, this is not necessarily the topic I'm working on. However, what we have been discussing at the ILO at global level, in 2019, the ILO completed 100 years, and we had the centenary declaration at the International Labour Conference on the future of work in the world. And in this centenary declaration, several important issues were raised. Well, one of them, of course, is promoting decent work in the sectors that currently have the biggest deficits, among them agricultural sector. Then another point which was discussed was let's say the frontiers towards the future are more digitalization, even in developing countries, especially in developing countries. So the access to technologies is extremely important to increase productivity and the opportunities for income and for better jobs. Of course, this needs to be done together with training, a huge investment in professional training. I think this has also already been mentioned here before. Of course, the whole social protection sector and the care sector. So to look at also at the division of labor between men and women, understand that care has been a job that has been done basically by women, and that women need to be compensated for that, and that women need to have the possibility of developing also their careers with a fairer distribution of roles and of incomes. I think that this is something very important. And in many of the social protection programs, women play a key role. So I think that this is also a way of strengthening their role and of strengthening or of fighting the imbalances that exist in almost all countries. So sorry for not answering directly to your question, but I think that these are some ideas that help us move towards that direction.
No, thanks. I'm very happy with your answer. I think it's I think the importance of understanding where the deficits are, the future jobs, the digitalization, and we know some countries are already investing, like Kenya, for example, in putting a lot more earlier in their curriculum, digitalization as part of the school curriculum, but also not just the job, but also the training that needs to be in place to make sure that we create those jobs. So earlier on in terms of the training part, and I think an important point that you mentioned also in terms of when we talk about decent jobs, also the balance, the gender balance around that, and women access to those jobs. So great points indeed. Thank you so much, Helmut. Let me go over our last paneliste. Je vais la présenter en français. Donc, Dr Sidibé de l'initiative présidentielle au Burkina Faso va maintenant nous présenter son intervention sur les cantines scolaires et l'importance des cantines scolaires comme instrument de protection sociale. Dr Sidibé, la parole est à vous.
Et merci Nicolas. Je voudrais dire merci au gouvernement de Côte d'Ivoire et de CERFAM, notre centre d'excellence, qui ont bien voulu organiser ce panel et ce webinaire sur une thématique aussi importante, mais compromettante pour l'atteinte des ODD si rien n'est fait. Donc, directement, je pense que je ne vais pas revenir sur aujourd'hui sur à quoi nous assistons, une montée justement de l'insécurité alimentaire, de la faim, alors que nos États consentent d'énormes efforts. J'irai directement à l'initiative présidentielle pour vous dire que depuis 2021, juin 2021, un vaste programme présidentiel de protection sociale a été lancé par les plus hautes autorités du Burkina Faso. Au fait, c'est un programme qui traduit l'engagement politique, la volonté politique d'un État d'éradiquer la faim. L'innovation de ce programme, c'est le lien formel que ce programme crée entre les cantines, l'approvisionnement des cantines scolaires et surtout l'utilisation des denrées alimentaires localement produites. Bon, l'objectif global de ce programme, c'est contribuer à l'amélioration de la sécurité alimentaire et nutritionnelle des enfants en âge scolaire et des ménages ruraux vulnérables au Burkina Faso. Nous avons 4 objectifs spécifiques qui sont traduits sous forme de la première, disponibilité des denrées alimentaires pour un approvisionnement optimal des cantines scolaires, parce que vous savez qu'une politique visant justement à privilégier, il va falloir d'abord investir dans tout ce qui est production agro-silvopastorale nationale. Donc, c'est intensifier nos productions. La deuxième composante, c'est l'amélioration de la valeur nutritionnelle des menus servis dans nos cantines. composante, c'est l'amélioration des revenus des ménages en état de précarité alimentaire, parce qu'effectivement, améliorer la production pour un pays comme le Burkina Faso, avec une population agricole de plus de 80%, c'est pouvoir agir sur les revenus des petits producteurs vulnérables et améliorer leurs revenus si toutefois la mise en marché est faite. Et comme nous avons une mise en marché avec les cantines scolaires, près de 9 millions d'enfants qui vont pouvoir bénéficier de ces cantines scolaires si toutefois l'impact effectivement est réel. Donc, vous comprenez que c'est un véritable marché. La quatrième composante, c'est la gouvernance. J'avoue que dans bon nombre de pays, et à l'instar du Burkina Faso, nous avons effectivement un problème de gouvernance et il va falloir jouer justement sur la gouvernance justement des politiques de cantines scolaires, d'approvisionnement des écoles. Et du point de vue bénéficiaire, nous avons deux types de bénéficiaires. Les 9 millions dont je parlais tout à l'heure d'enfants en âge scolaire, des enfants qui ont entre 3 et 18 ans environ, et en âge scolaire. Par contre, les enfants scolarisés dans le Burkina, les statistiques évaluent ce nombre à environ 6 millions. Les bénéficiaires indirects, comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, il y a des personnes vulnérables, il y a leurs parents, il y a les producteurs, les petits producteurs, et nous avons les producteurs, nous avons les éleveurs, les petits éleveurs, les exploitants, et surtout aussi les transformateurs, transformatrices de produits agro-silvopastoraux, et notamment les femmes et les jeunes. Je reviendrai sur ce point. Et les effets et impacts attendus, c'est que nous citons quelques-uns, juste quelques-uns, c'est la création d'emplois décents en milieu rural, et puis des emplois directs et des emplois indirects. Nous avons bien sûr la hausse des revenus des ménages, c'est ce qui est le plus important parce qu'un parent qui voit ses revenus améliorés, il va de soi qu'il améliore aussi les conditions de vie de sa famille et surtout les femmes qui sont porteuses de tout ce qui est éducation, sécurité alimentaire dans nos ménages. Nous aurons aussi justement environ 6 millions d'enfants qui bénéficieront de cet élément, de ce repas équilibré par jour pendant 9 mois. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, il faut dire qu'au Burkina Faso, certes, la cantine scolaire, elle est fonctionnelle, mais le plus souvent, ça ne couvre pas les 9 mois d'école des enfants, alors que les enfants sont en pleine croissance. Ce ne sont pas des aides qui font de la réserve. Il faut les alimenter pendant 9 mois. Bon, du point sur l'aspect contribution de l'alimentation scolaire à l'amélioration de la sécurité alimentaire pour laquelle le Burkina a été interpellé, il faut dire que chaque année au Burkina Faso, près de 180 millions de repas sont distribués à environ 4 millions d'enfants chaque année. Et les enfants qui parlent d'enfants parlent d'être fragiles. Ils constituent une couche vulnérable sur le plan alimentaire et nutritionnel. Ils ne font pas de la réserve, mais ils sont en pleine croissance. Il faut répondre aux besoins de croissance. Et agir sur la qualité et la quantité aussi des repas, elle contribue à améliorer le statut alimentaire nutritionnel et surtout les performances scolaires des enfants. Et les indicateurs de scolarité, à savoir le taux de scolarité, le maintien des enfants à l'école, surtout celui des filles, et surtout leur taux de réussite est amélioré. Pour déjà la première année, un success story, je peux vous dire que depuis que l'initiative présidentielle a été lancée, nous avons suivi des écoles qui, avant que l'initiative présidentielle ne soit opérationnelle, ils étaient à un taux de réussite au CEP. Le CEP en Afrique, c'est au fait 6 ans après lorsque l'enfant est mis à l'école. C'est l'école primaire, c'est le diplôme qui marque la fin de l'école du cursus primaire de l'élève. Ils étaient à un taux de réussite de 29%, environ 30%, et avoir appliqué l'initiative présidentielle, nous nous sommes retrouvés à un taux de réussite de 65%, plus que doublé. Donc, ce sont des success stories, mais on espère justement en avoir plus. Et du point de vue contribution également, il faut dire que c'est une approche au fait dans laquelle les productions locales sont privilégiées. Privilégiées, je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, que ce sont des petits producteurs. Donc, cela va procurer des revenus à des personnes vulnérables, ce qui va améliorer leurs conditions de vie, notamment leur situation alimentaire. Et en privilégiant le circuit court, l'approche stimule un développement de l'économie locale. Les stratégies développées, quelles sont les stratégies développées? Comme stratégie développée, premièrement, c'est au fait, c'est pour le Burkina Faso, nous avons connu par le président Thomas Sankara ce qu'il avait pris comme, il avait eu comme vision, le consommons burkinabé, c'est-à-dire consommons ce que nous produisons et produisons ce que nous consommons. Mais cette fois-ci, l'initiative présidentielle fait un focus sur l'alimentation scolaire. L'autre, c'était une vision de façon large. Cette fois-ci, c'est sur l'alimentation scolaire. Et aujourd'hui, il faut dire que l'accent est mis sur l'utilisation des produits locaux dans l'approvisionnement des cantines scolaires, c'est-à-dire un circuit court. Nous réduisons le circuit d'approvisionnement et c'est une stratégie très importante en matière systémique et transformationnelle du point de vue alimentation. Ça améliore non seulement la qualité des produits, parce que ce sont des produits frais, ce ne sont pas des produits conservés pendant des années avant d'amener au niveau de l'enfant. Nous faisons des formations. Bien sûr que pour transformer, au fait, une transformation a besoin d'abord d'un renforcement de capacité. Ce sont des communautés éducatives, ce sont les collectivités qui doivent s'approprier de cette initiative. Et justement, pour voir ce changement, nous passons d'abord par des formations pour renforcer les capacités des communautés et des collectivités éducatives, à savoir les mères et les associations de parents d'élèves, les mères éducatives et surtout les cantinières. Et au niveau national, nous avons élaboré avec l'initiative présidentielle et les différentes parties, nous avons élaboré un répertoire des mets et menus nutritifs à base de produits locaux en faisant un inventaire, un diagnostic au fait des potentialités du Burkina Faso, de nos régions, et à pérenniser cette initiative. Les défis, ils sont nombreux et multiformes. Le premier défi pour l'initiative présidentielle, c'est le défi de financement. Malgré les efforts consentis par l'État et les partenaires au développement, il faut dire que les programmes d'alimentation aujourd'hui fonctionnels au niveau du Burkina Faso ne couvrent pas les 9 mois de l'année scolaire. Il nous faut agir du point de vue finance. Et du point de vue finance, il faut saluer le fait que au moins l'initiative soit portée par la plus haute autorité et connaisse l'engagement politique du Burkina Faso. Du point de vue coordination, c'est le secrétariat permanent qui a pour ancrage institutionnel la primature. Je suis la secrétaire permanente et j'avoue que les plus hautes autorités ont un regard particulier sur la mise en œuvre de l'initiative et tout récemment, la déclaration du chef de l'État de la transition en a fait un large focus sur l'alimentation, le développement de l'agriculture, le développement de l'alimentation, la sécurité alimentaire et pour pouvoir toucher les personnes les plus vulnérables. c'est un programme très fort porté par le gouvernement de transition du Burkina Faso. Et conformément à la 4e composante que j'ai citée tout à l'heure, c'est le problème de gouvernance. L'État alloue chaque année au Burkina Faso, malgré un budget restreint, l'État burkinabé consent environ 19 milliards de francs CFA aux collectivités territoriales pour l'acquisition de vivres. Mais avec les différentes crises, l'inflation, il faut dire que franchement dit, ce budget n'est pas suffisant. Ce budget n'arrive pas à être géré de façon convenable. Il va falloir agir aussi sur les aspects de gouvernance, de gestion de ce budget. Un autre défi, c'est l'engagement des communautés en faveur de l'alimentation scolaire. Nous n'allons pas coudre des modèles et aller donner aux collectivités ou aux communautés. Il faut que ces communautés s'approprient justement du dispositif et des stratégies développées, des politiques publiques développées par nos États en vue d'en faire justement un développement durable. Et pour cette initiative, nous voulons beaucoup privilégier les cantines endogènes. Les cantines endogènes, nous voulons les rendre beaucoup fonctionnelles afin que ce soit une prise, une responsabilité, ils relèvent de la responsabilité des parents d'élèves à alimenter convenablement leurs enfants si toutefois leur revenu aussi est amélioré. Les opportunités, nous en avons. Il faut dire que c'est l'existence d'un cadre réglementaire et d'instruments juridiques qui servent de référence en matière d'intervention dans le domaine de la sécurité alimentaire au Burkina Faso. Nous avons le plan national de sécurité alimentaire et nutritionnelle qui fédère toutes les actions du gouvernement en matière de sécurité alimentaire. Deuxième opportunité également, c'est la mise en place d'une structure de coordination multisectorielle. Le secrétariat permanent est une structure de coordination qui regroupe 13 ministères au niveau du programme présidentiel. Cette initiative regroupe 13 ministères. C'est une vaste coordination et c'est une structure qui a été instituée pour propulser l'action gouvernementale en matière de sécurité alimentaire scolaire, notamment la synergie d'action, la mobilisation des ressources. Une autre opportunité, c'est surtout la forte mobilisation des partenaires techniques et financiers, voyant le bien fondé de cette initiative. Les défis. Les défis, non, je pense que j'ai toujours des opportunités. Une autre opportunité, effectivement, c'est l'approvisionnement des cantines scolaires à base de produits locaux, parce que pouvoir alimenter 9 millions d'enfants en âge scolaire, vous savez que c'est un véritable marché. Et ce marché-là, il est porteur pour des petits producteurs, ce qui renforce le professionnalisme des acteurs, favorise l'investissement en vue d'une véritable émergence des chaînes de valeur des filières concernées, parce que nous avons quelques produits pour lesquels nous devons développer les chaînes de valeur. Enfin, et très important dans le contexte actuel, après la crise de la COVID en 2019, qui a déjà fragilisé les systèmes alimentaires et l'économie mondiale, il y a la crise russo-ukrainienne. Nous ne pouvons pas parler aujourd'hui d'une fragilité de la sécurité alimentaire dans nos pays, surtout les pays africains, puisque, au fait, bon nombre de pays dépendaient des vivres, des denrées venant de ces pays. Aujourd'hui, nous voyons le bien fondé de refonder nos systèmes alimentaires. Ça constitue une opportunité pour le Burkina Faso de pouvoir accéder et prendre justement des mesures très fortes pour améliorer la production et revoir tout le dispositif de sécurité alimentaire. C'est pour cela la consommation locale, nous allons essayer de la maintenir et la cible est bien visée, c'est la cible des enfants, 9 millions. c'est déjà presque la moitié de la population burkinabé. Si nous parvenons d'ici la fin de l'initiative à pouvoir atteindre cette cible, ne serait-ce même que les 2/3 de cette cible, vous voyez quel impact l'initiative présidentielle aurait porté à l'économie du Burkina Faso. Bon, en conclusion, nous pouvons dire que les programmes d'alimentation scolaire, comme tout le monde le sait, constituent des instruments de protection sociale pour le capital humain du futur et le développement durable de nos nations. Conclusion encore, c'est qu'au sortir du sommet des Nations Unies sur la transformation des systèmes alimentaires en 2021, il faut se féliciter déjà que le Burkina Faso ait pris l'engagement par les plus hautes autorités à travers la mise en œuvre d'actions pragmatiques qui concourent à l'atteinte des ODD, et un certain nombre d'ODD, à savoir 1, 2, 4, et bon nombre parce qu'il y a même l'ODD 17 et par le partenariat. Et conclusion, toujours, nous pouvons conclure que les défis, ils sont complexes et multiformes. Les actions structurantes doivent être renforcées, d'où une bonne collaboration avec le CERFAM. Le CERFAM, nous avons entamé la collaboration, le partenariat avec le CERFAM, il y a de cela environ 2 mois. Et aujourd'hui, nous nous félicitons que ce partenariat prenne forme et qu'il s'améliore. Notre souhait est vraiment de renforcer ce partenariat avec le CERFAM, qui est notre centre d'expertise pour lutter contre la faim et la malnutrition. Enfin, je peux dire que pour notre part, nous sommes disposés à renforcer ce partenariat et collaborer avec toute institution œuvrant dans le domaine des cantines scolaires. Et pour clore maintenant ma présentation, je finirai par ce mot d'ordre: pour une sécurité alimentaire nutritionnelle au profit des enfants, pour de meilleures performances scolaires, ensemble agissons. Donc, privilégions l'action parce que l'inaction a un coût. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Dr Sidibé, pour votre intervention remarquable intervention qui reflète l'importance des cantines scolaires comme instrument de protection sociale. Et comme vous l'avez souligné, rappelle ce qui avait été discuté au préalable, c'est cette intégration. Vous l'avez dit, les cantines scolaires, bien sûr, offrent des repas aux enfants, ce qui est indispensable, mais il y a des impacts indirects. Vous l'avez souligné, l'impact de certains bénéficiaires, les producteurs, les transformateurs, ceux qui travaillent le long de la chaîne de valeur. Vous avez souligné l'impact de la création d'emplois, vous avez souligné l'impact sur l'augmentation du revenu des ménages. Donc vraiment, l'outil cantine scolaire en tant qu'instrument de protection sociale, en tant qu'instrument intégré de protection sociale, je dirais même. Donc, parfait exemple. Il y a peut-être une question au niveau, vous avez souligné l'importance des communautés. Il y a une question qui nous est venue en disant, est-ce que le rôle de la société civile, le rôle des ONG, est-ce que c'est quelque chose que vous pouvez élaborer un peu plus? Comment ces projets travaillent en adéquation avec la société civile? Est-ce que vous pouvez élaborer un peu plus?
Oui, le rôle des ONG, merci beaucoup pour cette question très pertinente. Le rôle des ONG, le rôle de la société civile, le rôle de tout un chacun. Il faut dire que la mise en œuvre de l'initiative implique plusieurs parties. Il y a l'État, qui est d'abord le premier précurseur. Il y a les PTF, il y a la société civile qui joue un rôle de veille, bien sûr, les communautés, et il y a les ONG, parce qu'au Burkina Faso, nous avons bon nombre d'ONG qui agissent et qui interviennent au niveau des cantines scolaires. Ce qu'il faut maintenant faire, c'est organiser l'action, l'intervention de ces ONG-là pour pouvoir mieux appréhender, mieux saisir leur intervention dans les cantines scolaires et mieux les organiser afin de ne laisser personne de côté et que ces ONG ne se voient pas agglutinées au niveau de certaines régions ou bien agglutinés au niveau de certaines écoles pour pouvoir agir. Il y a toujours, comme on le dit, des parties, parce que mieux vaut privilégier l'action à l'inaction que ces ONG-là. Au fait, il y a un dialogue permanent, un dialogue et proactif avec ces ONG. Donc, merci beaucoup. Nous collaborons beaucoup avec le SPON, aujourd'hui au Burkina Faso, et presque toutes les parties, parce que le secrétariat permanent, justement, a été mis en place pour pouvoir interagir et faire beaucoup de coordination avec toutes les parties prenantes.
Merci beaucoup, Dr. Sidibé. We just have 5 minutes left to this very rich discussion. Maybe going to the question that we received, I would like to maybe go on this integrated approach, which I think it's very key. We heard that from Paul's intervention. We've heard that in the context of the school feeding. There's a question maybe to you, Paul, on the importance of investing in the frontline workforce. You know, you mentioned the importance of getting a design of integrating. So that requires several sectors and the workforce on the ground to work together. So any perspective on what investments are needed in the workforce, especially when we talk a lot about localization, you know, the power of localization. Maybe can you elaborate some perspective there?
Thank you, Nicola. I will try. I was actually trying to type my answer, but it was quickly getting long because there's much to say about that. I think we need investment in the numbers and investment in capacity. I think in almost all countries in Africa, we have seen expansion of social protection, notably cash transfer programs. They cannot be implemented without a very strong role for frontline workers, in particular, social workers, para-social workers, or community volunteers. They all have roles in identifying the people, registering the people, making sure their feedback is obtained, monitoring the program. These are core functions of any social protection or cash transfer program. And we cannot rely on other mechanisms than the core mechanisms in the national system through also the social welfare sector. Secondly, I think, and I've tried to mention it in my presentation, the expansion of cash programs provides an opportunity because there are multiple vulnerabilities within these families. And if we have capacity to help identify cases in the families and refer to other services or reach the same families through the same platform with information or other investments, you need capacity to do that. And the only sustainable way to provide that capacity, in my view, is to invest in the frontline, what we call social service workforce. And these include the social workers, formerly trained social workers. They include what we call para-professionals, and they include the large gamut of volunteers in the community. And if we see that as a group to deliver those protection programs and take the opportunity to link with other services, then we can go a long way.
Thanks, Paul. Very, very good answer. Let me just close with, sorry, we don't have time for more questions and answer. The question will be answered, the ones that are in the Q&A chat, so you will do that. We've seen questions also whether the presentation will be shared. They will be shared, you will receive the presentation. Before I pass back to Christiane for a closing remark, just some key messages that I've heard on this very, very vibrant conversation. One to me is the importance of telling the social protection story. And we've heard a lot of that, and I think it's in the words of Helmut said, social protection by itself is not sufficient. We need a set of tools, and to me, it speaks to what is that social protection story. It's not just social assistance and the cash transfer, which we always often associate with. There's also the social insurance. There's also the activity and the labor market. So we've heard through these various interventions the importance of social protection as a package that needs to be integrated. We need to connect the different elements, social insurance with cash transfers, with livelihood opportunities. We've heard about, from Paul's intervention, the importance of shock responsive social protection. And I think there was a question there also in the chat on the importance of social protection on the role with the famine. Anticipatory action, understanding where the impact will be, will allow to direct the social protection interventions to that end. So it's been obviously there's more work to be done. We've heard the importance of financing. Many countries are also moving their financing into devolution to states, to decentralized level. We need to make sure the fundings are available there at the lowest level. We've heard the importance of the design. We've heard the importance of capacity, local capacity. We've heard the importance of governance, good governance. And finally, I think we've heard the importance of the evaluation. There's a lot of good practices out there. We need to evaluate. We need to look at what the impact of those programs are, and we need to learn, because that's a feedback mechanism that will only improve overall social protection. So it's been a vibrant conversation. Let me pass on to Christiane for some closing remark.
Thank you, Nicolas. First of all, congratulations for an excellent moderation and for capturing such important lessons for a very enriching workshop. No, I think we had the opportunity to hear from different perspectives, from Kant's perspective, and one thing that is clear is the evolution we have seen in how social protection systems are taken into consideration not only by partners, UN agencies, but also by governments. No, I think one lesson that you have highlighted is the integrated approach and how you can bring these multiple benefits when looking at a very well-designed social protection. And I think each of our excellent speakers brought their, not only their personal experience and expertise in the thematic, but also their field experience, their in the different at the global level, but also applied to the African countries. And I think social protection system we have seen, it's a reality for a lot of countries, for many countries, I think at the global level, as one of the tools to really face this different and multiple crises. And I think we learned a lot today. I think, as you mentioned, a lot of good practice to investigate more innovations, but for sure, these dialogue and exchanges around the social protections lessons is something to continue. And we hope to see you all in the continuation of this series of a webinar. Thank you very much again for all participants that stayed with us till now from multiple countries in the world. We are very happy and we appreciate very much you following up our activities. So thank you to our speakers that enriched the dialogue and the excellent quality of presentations, and also a lot of the evidence for social protection that sometimes it's so hard to know where to find. So thank you for everybody for showing these and providing the tools for people to look for more information on this topic. So thank you very much for you, Nicolas, also for a perfect moderation and for supporting us in this event. Thank you, colleagues, and I hope to see you soon.
Sorry, I'm going to check that. My connection.
Thank you, everyone. The dialogue continues. We'll be, I'm sure, connecting somehow in the near future. All the best to everyone. Good rest of your day. Thank you to the speakers. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Au revoir.
Au revoir. Je voulais parler à ma fille.